Sunlight slipped across the stone counter in David Collins' kitchen, the kind of soft Texas winter light that makes everything look gentler than it feels. He stood with both hands wrapped around a warm coffee mug, listening to the quiet of his new villa in Barton Creek. Wreaths hung on the front doors, the tree in the corner glowed with white lights, and the scent of roasted cinnamon pine cones drifted in from the foyer. He had imagined this morning 100 times, the build-up to a loud and happy Christmas, a house full of family, a table set for laughter. The phone on the counter buzzed once. He turned it over with a small smile, expecting something cheerful from his daughter. The message was short. "We want a quiet Christmas with the in-laws." The words did not shout, but they landed like a slammed door. He read them twice, then a third time, as if patience could change their meaning. In the hush that followed, memory walked in like an uninvited guest and pulled out a chair. He saw a younger Brianna in a cap and gown and remembered writing tuition checks that made his hand tremble, not from doubt, but from love. He saw a wedding reception with lights strung over a dance floor and a dress that sparkled like a lake at noon, and he remembered adding up costs and feeling only pride. He saw a real estate agent sliding a folder across a table, his signature releasing $80,000 so his daughter could have a start worthy of the dreams she named out loud. Every time she had called, he had answered. Every time she hinted, he had offered. For years he had told himself that this was what fathers did, that generosity would grow gratitude the way rain grows flowers. He set the phone down and let his gaze move over the room he had built for a life that had taken decades to earn. The kitchen looked out over a clean sweep of lawn, trimmed and lit for the season. The dining room table waited under a chandelier, 12 chairs standing in quiet attention. The fireplace in the living room held a steady flame behind its glass. This house came from careful choices, early mornings, and risks that people said were foolish until they were not. He had built a consulting practice long after his friends had retired. He had studied sectors most people ignored and bought small pieces of them. He had weathered years that felt like winter and held on until spring. The message on the counter did not ask for money. It asked for absence. What it did not say felt louder than what it said. "You stay there. We stay here." The thought stung, but beneath the sting there was another feeling, older and quieter, like a river under ice. He had been a good father. He knew that as surely as he knew his own name. He had also been easy to lean on. He had stood so steadily for so long that no one noticed the weight he carried. He rinsed the mug, dried it, and placed it on the rack with a care that felt ceremonial. Outside, a pair of cardinals flicked through the live oaks. Somewhere down the street, a delivery truck hissed to a stop and then moved on. He breathed in and let the air go out slowly. If Brianna wanted a quiet Christmas, he would give her the space she asked for. He would not argue. He would not tug on a door she had closed. The house did not have to be lonely because one person chose not to walk through it. The idea came to him in the simple way good ideas arrive, without fanfare. He would fill these rooms with people who knew him for himself and not for what he could provide. People who had watched him work and had clapped for him when no band was playing. People who said yes because they wanted to share a table and a story and a night lit by kindness. He pictured his brother's broad grin, the way Robert always looked around a new space, like he was measuring the world for joy. He pictured Tom and Linda leaning in at the table to tell a story that would end in laughter. He pictured Patricia arriving with a dessert she insisted was simple, even though everyone knew it tasted like a celebration. He moved through the villa and noticed the spots where conversation would flow. He shifted the leather sectional a few inches so it faced the fire in a more welcoming way. He pulled 2 chairs in from the office to make a circle by the windows. He opened the cabinet where he kept candlesticks and chose the simple ones, the ones that made a soft light without asking for attention. He imagined platters arriving from Morton's and the first slice of prime rib falling clean and fragrant onto a warm plate. He imagined pouring a deep red that had waited in his cellar for a moment worthy of its patience. As he worked, the ache in his chest eased, not because he ignored it, but because he acknowledged it. A man can love his child and still refuse to be treated like a convenience. A man can honor history while choosing a healthier present. He had taught Brianna to ride a bicycle by running beside her until she learned to balance. He had let go then, and she had pedaled away, laughing. Perhaps this was another kind of letting go, not bitter, not dramatic, just a quiet decision to stop sprinting beside someone who had already turned down another street. The light in the kitchen shifted as clouds drifted past the sun. David stood still and listened again to the silence. It no longer sounded like emptiness. It sounded like permission. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and returned to the phone. A tradition does not have to end to be transformed. A holiday does not need everyone to be meaningful. There are many ways to be a family, and some of the best ones are chosen on purpose. He opened his contacts and stared at a familiar name. The smallest smile found his mouth, the kind a person wears when a decision settles into place. He scrolls to his brother Robert's number and takes a deep breath before pressing call. Robert answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that familiar blend of warmth and worry. David told him about the text, about the way the words had landed, and about the choice he was making instead of pleading for a different outcome. Robert listened without interrupting, and then let out a breath that sounded like approval. He and Sarah would come. He said it quickly, as if he had been waiting years to say yes to a version of the holiday that did not require tiptoeing. "Bring a bottle of something you love," David said, "and tell me what dish you two want to add." "Sarah has a potato recipe that could win awards," Robert promised, and then they both laughed, the kind of soft laugh that puts a floor under a fragile moment. When the call ended, the house felt a little more alive. David scrolled to Tom Richardson and pressed call. Tom picked up with a bright hello that had not changed since their first deal together. David kept it simple. He was hosting a small Christmas dinner, close friends only, nothing loud, just good food and better company. Tom did not hesitate. He and Linda had wanted to see the villa since the day the first photos went around. They would be honored to come, and Linda already had a dessert in mind if Patricia did not claim that spot. "Invite both," David said. "There is room on this table for more than one sweet ending." He reached Patricia next. She answered from a grocery aisle somewhere, the hum of refrigeration behind her voice. He explained and she hummed approval, the low sound of a friend who has watched you carry more than your share. "I will bring tiramisu," she said, "the good one that needs a full day to settle into itself." She promised to arrive a little late so she could set it in the fridge without fanfare, the way she always protected the modesty of her best work. David smiled into the empty kitchen and thanked her for saying yes. Mark and Sarah Henderson completed the circle. Mark teased that he had been waiting for a reason to put on a real jacket, and Sarah said she would bring her favorite glazed carrots and a story from their first Christmas in Austin. The guest list settled with satisfying weight. 10 seats. 10 people who had known him by his choices and not by his checkbook. 10 voices that would not demand, but would offer. He moved from calls to planning without breaking the thread. He opened a legal pad and wrote in neat columns. Prime rib from Morton's. Ordered thick and cooked to a rosy center. Twice baked potatoes, golden and crisp at the edges. Roasted Brussels sprouts with shards of bacon and a glaze that made them shine. A simple Caesar salad, cold and bright. Rolls warm enough to melt butter on contact. For wine, he would pull bottles from the cellar that had waited quietly for a reason to be opened. He wrote the names in careful print, then drew a line under the food and started a second column for the house. He walked room to room and adjusted the space like a host, easing the way for conversation. In the living room, he angled the sectional toward the fire so the flames would invite without dominating. He added 2 armchairs from the office to complete a circle that encouraged eye contact and unhurried stories. He set a tray on the coffee table with small bowls for spiced nuts and olives, not too fussy, just enough to nibble while people arrived. He checked the sound system and chose a playlist of holiday jazz, soft saxophone and piano that would never compete with a good story. In the dining room, he ran his hand over the table and pictured place settings, then took out the good plates and counted them with the pleasure of a man who has prepared for this moment. He laid out linen napkins that felt like an old ritual and polished the simple silver that had belonged to his mother. He placed candles down the center of the table and interwove a strand of greenery with a few red berries, tidy and low so no one would have to crane around a centerpiece just to be seen. The afternoon turned to a warm Texas glow as he picked up the phone again and confirmed the order with Morton's. He spoke with a calm voice to the wine shop and arranged delivery for late afternoon the next day, leaving room for a gracious tip at the door. He texted Robert a short list of final needs and smiled when the reply came back within a minute. Consider it done. He called the local florist and asked for a small arrangement for the entry that smelled like winter without shouting pine across the whole house. He checked the lights on the tree, changing one string that flickered, then stepped back until the white glow landed on the glass ornaments like a snowfall you can see and touch. Between tasks, memory tried to reclaim him, the old reflex to wonder if his daughter would change her mind, if a softer tone or a different approach might coax her back. He acknowledged the thought and let it pass. He was not closing a door forever. He was opening a door tonight, to a way of living that did not depend on a single person choosing him. He thought about this idea as he folded a stack of dish towels, as he set the extra chairs off to the side in case a conversation grew so good that people lingered at the table longer than the food did. He thought about it as he placed a few framed photos on a sideboard, images from old trips and work milestones, not as trophies, but as gentle invitations to ask about the years a man often carries silently. By early evening, he paused in the doorway between kitchen and living room. The house felt different now. It felt ready. It was not the show of wealth that warmed him. It was the sense that he had prepared a place where people would feel at ease, where laughter would come the way candlelight does, slowly and then all at once. He wrote the timeline in his mind. Tomorrow morning, a walk for coffee at the corner shop, a quick stop for fresh herbs, back home to light the fire and put on the music. He would set the table in the afternoon, then change into the jacket he had kept for years because it made him stand a little straighter. He pictured greeting Robert at the door and hearing Sarah's delighted gasp. He pictured Tom clapping him on the shoulder, Linda taking a slow turn to admire the light in the room, Patricia waving a spoon away when someone tried to help with dessert, Mark and Sarah arriving a few minutes later with an easy joke that smoothed any edge. The phone vibrated on the counter. It was a text from Patricia with a photo of cocoa powder and mascarpone. Taking shape, she wrote. He thanked her and stared for an extra second at the simple kindness of someone keeping him in the loop on a dessert. The smallest details felt like stitches drawing a new fabric together. Night came on and the villa settled. He set the alarm to a gentle chime and made a final pass through the rooms, touching the back of a chair here, straightening a frame there, as if checking a heartbeat. He stood a moment at the front windows, looking out at a street lined with white lights and simple wreaths, the kind of neighborhood display that says we are celebrating, but we are also resting. He imagined tomorrow as a bridge he was already walking across. The step he had taken today did not erase old love. It simply set it down politely and walked forward. When he finally turned off the last lamp and climbed the stairs, his mind did not race. It moved like a steady river, deep and quiet. He lay down and listened to the kind of silence that lets a person hear his own courage. He smiled to himself without effort, a natural conclusion to a day spent making room for joy. The doorbell will ring tomorrow, and David knows the right people will be on the other side. The morning sun rose over the neighborhood with a kind of golden patience, spilling across David's kitchen like it had been waiting for this exact day. He stood barefoot on the polished hardwood, holding a steaming cup of coffee, feeling the smooth grain beneath his feet. For years, Christmas morning had been tangled with unspoken tensions, forced smiles, and the quiet mental accounting of how much he would give and how much he would lose in the giving. But today was different. Today was his. Outside, frost clung to the hedges, a delicate lace that would melt before noon. The villa, quiet but expectant, seemed to hum with its own anticipation. In the dining room, the long table was already set, linen napkins folded neatly beside polished silver. Candles waited in their holders, green garland weaving between them like a promise. The prime rib from Morton's would arrive later, but the air already carried faint hints of rosemary and butter from the roasted vegetables prepared the night before. David moved with an ease he hadn't felt in years. No part of this day required him to brace for criticism or to navigate the shifting moods of someone who saw his worth only in dollars. He walked through each room slowly, checking the small details, not for perfection, but for welcome. A chair angled toward the fire, the right music cued on the sound system, extra glasses on the sideboard, because people always stayed longer when they felt at home. Robert called mid-morning. "We're bringing that potato dish Sarah's famous for," he said, "and a bottle of red that's been waiting for a good reason." David smiled at the phrase, good reason. That was what today had become, a celebration justified not by obligation, but by choice. By 3 o'clock, the winter light had softened to that warm, honey color that makes everything look like a photograph worth keeping. The first knock came exactly when he expected it, Robert's familiar rhythm. When the door opened, his brother stepped inside with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. Sarah behind him holding a covered dish that smelled like comfort. They paused in the entryway, taking in the glow of the chandeliers, the slow flicker of the fireplace. "It's even more beautiful in person," Sarah said softly. Soon, the villa filled with the sound of coats being shrugged off, greetings layered over laughter, the faint pop of a wine cork. Patricia arrived with her tiramisu, cheeks pink from the cold, immediately claiming a spot in the kitchen to tuck it away. Tom and Linda came next, their voices carrying the warmth of old partnership. The Hendersons followed, Mark shaking David's hand firmly, Sarah handing over a dish of glazed carrots that glistened like jewels. They moved easily from room to room, the kind of guests who didn't need to be told where to stand or sit. Conversation bloomed in pockets. Stories of first jobs, unexpected windfalls, travel plans waiting for spring. Someone put on a record from David's collection, the low swing of a jazz saxophone curling around the edges of the evening. Dinner was served without ceremony, but with a kind of reverence. The prime rib carved into generous slices, the vegetables passed hand to hand, the wine poured steadily. The candles flickered against the glasses, each reflection a small celebration. At one point, Robert raised his glass. "To my brother, who built a life worth sharing, and to the people lucky enough to be here tonight." The clink of crystal followed, and David felt the words settle in his chest like a steady flame. After dessert, no one moved quickly to leave. They lingered in the living room, leaning back into the couches, legs tucked under, telling stories that meandered like the slow fall of snow outside. Patricia showed photos from a trip to New Orleans. Tom recounted a deal from years ago that had nearly gone sideways until David stepped in. Mark spoke of the vineyard he hoped to visit in the coming year. The room was warm not just from the fire, but from the rare safety of being among people who asked for nothing but your company. As the night edged toward its end, David realized something. The peace in the room wasn't fragile. It wasn't dependent on avoiding certain topics or tiptoeing around someone's temper. It was sturdy, built on respect and shared history, the kind that holds even when the door closes behind the last guest. When the final goodbyes were said and the last car's headlights disappeared down the street, he stood for a moment in the quiet. The table still bore the faint scent of rosemary and wine. The fire was low but steady. And in the stillness, David felt not the emptiness of a house after a party, but the fullness of a life he had chosen. Tonight, he thought, was proof that freedom could be as simple as a table set for the right people. By late evening, the villa felt like the safest place in the world. The fire had settled into a steady orange glow, the wine was flowing in gentle rhythm, and laughter rose and fell like music. David had eased into the armchair nearest the hearth, letting his guests' voices mingle without needing to guide them. For once, he wasn't orchestrating anyone's happiness. He was simply part of it. In the kitchen, Sarah and Patricia stood shoulder to shoulder, arranging dessert plates with small portions of tiramisu. Robert was telling a story to the Hendersons about a fishing trip gone wrong in the most comical way. Tom and Linda sat by the big windows, pointing out constellations beyond the glass. It was in the middle of this warmth that David heard it, faint at first, just a sound at the edge of attention. A car door slamming, then another, slow, deliberate footsteps across the gravel driveway. His mind flicked to the neighbors, but the cadence was wrong, too forceful, too purposeful. He glanced at Robert, who caught the change in his expression. "Everything all right?" his brother murmured. David managed to smile. "Probably nothing." But even as he said it, his ears strained for the next sound. It came about 20 minutes later. Not a knock, not a ring, a pounding, heavy, unyielding, making the solid oak door tremble in its frame. The room went silent mid-laughter. Wine glasses hung halfway to lips. Every pair of eyes turned toward the front entry. A voice, sharp and unmistakable, cut through the winter air. "Open this door right now!" David closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Brianna. Her words carried the same tone he had heard countless times before. An accusation disguised as command. But tonight it landed differently. Tonight, he wasn't the man who would rush to appease her. He stood slowly, his pulse steady. "Excuse me," he said to the room, his voice calm but firm. Robert rose with him, a silent shadow of support. In the foyer, the pounding started again, each blow echoing up the staircase. Through the glass, David saw her, shoulders squared, face tight with fury, Cody behind her shifting from foot to foot, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. He opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "Brianna," he said evenly, "you're making a scene." "I don't care," she shot back, her breath visible in the cold air. "You think you can throw a party and leave out your own daughter?" "Brianna," Robert's voice came from behind him, low but unmistakable. "This isn't the way." Her eyes flicked to her uncle with the same sharpness that used to send David scrambling to smooth things over. "Not tonight." He unhooked the chain and stepped back, opening the door fully. She swept in, scanning the living room in one fast, assessing sweep, spotting the elegant table, the half-empty wine glasses, the glow of the fire. "This is unbelievable," she said, voice rising. "Where did all of this come from? How long have you been hiding money from me?" A hush fell heavier than the frost outside. The guests, people who had known David for decades, sat still, watching the storm blow through his doorway. No one moved, but the room's quiet carried a kind of solidarity. "Maybe we should talk privately," David offered, his tone measured. But Brianna only stepped further in, her heels sharp against the wood, her gaze bouncing from one guest to the next. "You're all part of this, aren't you? All sitting here pretending like he hasn't been keeping secrets from his own family." Patricia, standing near the mantel, straightened slightly. "We're here to celebrate a friend," she said, "not to tear one down." The tension hung between them, thick and unmoving. And in that moment, David understood. The night was no longer about a simple Christmas dinner. This was the line he had been moving toward for years, whether he'd admitted it or not. Somewhere deep inside, the warmth of the fire met the cold clarity of resolve. He could feel it settling in his chest. Tonight would end differently than any Christmas before. Behind a closed office door, father and daughter faced the truth they had avoided for years. The party quieted on the other side of the wall, the soft hum of voices held at a respectful distance. David stood by the window where Austin's winter lights blinked through the live oaks, while Brianna paced a tight line in front of the bookcase, her breath quick from anger and fear. She began with explanations, with words that tried to soften what she had written that morning. Words about a quiet morning with the in-laws and an assumption that dinner with her father was a given. David listened without interrupting, the way he had trained himself to do. Then he asked a question that did not need adornment. "When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something, just to talk." The answer did not come. Silence did. A few minutes earlier, the flashing red and blue had washed across the front windows. The pounding on the door had grown louder, and Brianna had pulled out her phone with a practiced defiance. 2 officers arrived with the calm of people who had already guessed the shape of the evening. The older one introduced himself as Sergeant Martinez and asked for the story, while the younger officer took notes on a tablet, his eyes taking in the quiet room and the way the music barely rose above conversation. David answered simply. He was the homeowner. They were having a small Christmas dinner. No loud music, no dispute, no threat. Robert stepped forward when asked and showed a forwarded text that read exactly as it had landed that morning. "We want a quiet Christmas with the in-laws." The officers read it, exchanged a brief look, and nodded. They reminded Brianna that filing a false report was a serious matter. They noted that there had been no other complaints on the street, and that the evening fell well within the bounds of peace. When they left, the night seemed to exhale. David had invited his daughter to speak in private, not to win, but to be clear. Now, in the office, clarity continued its quiet work. Brianna tried another route. She asked where the money had come from. She said the house appeared from nowhere. She said no one had told her. David did not raise his voice. He named the years he had worked, the risks he had taken, the companies he had believed in when they were young, the consulting practice he had kept sharp when others retired. He said he did not owe a monthly financial report to anyone, not even to family. He said he wanted a relationship that did not begin and end with a request. Then he scrolled through their messages and read the last 10 aloud. Help with a car payment. Help with a roof repair. Help because a job had ended. He asked again for one recent moment when she had called only to ask about his day. The window framed his reflection as he waited. She could not find the moment because it did not exist. Cody stood at the threshold like a man caught between tides. He cleared his throat once and suggested they all take a breath and try again later. Brianna waved him off. She stepped past David and opened the office door herself, walking back into the living room as if a larger audience could bend the truth. The guests turned toward her with the unstartled attention of grown people who had seen much and learned to keep their balance. Brianna's voice rose. She said her father had been hiding money that should have been disclosed. She said he had stolen family Christmas. She said he had manipulated records. The accusations fell into a room that did not belong to that kind of drama. Tom spoke first with the steadiness of an old colleague. He said he had known David's investments for years. Linda added that she had watched him do the careful work that leads to a house like this. Patricia said she had seen the portfolio when he was thinking about retiring, long before there was a hint of tonight's trouble. Mark remembered the early days of digital coins and the startups that took off after years of patient holding. Each voice was calm. Each sentence brought the air back to level. Brianna looked from face to face, searching for a crack. She said they did not understand the family dynamic. She said they were taking sides. Robert answered with a line he had repeated to his brother in smaller moments for decades. Respect is earned, even in families. He did not spit the words. He set them down like a truth that could not be moved. Cody finally met David's eyes and spoke with the tired honesty of someone who could not pretend any longer. He said they should go home. Brianna stared at him as if he had stepped off a map. David walked to the front door and opened it to the cold, clean night. The house fell so still that even the fire seemed to listen. He said he had spent 30 years enabling behavior that diminished them both. He said he would not spend the rest of his life as a bank account with a heartbeat. He said he loved his daughter and always would, but love without respect is not love a person can live inside. He did not shout. He did not shame. He simply drew the line that had been waiting for him to find it. For a beat, no one moved. Then Sarah's voice, gentle and firm, said that everyone in the room had known the kind of man David was for a very long time, and that was why they were here. Patricia lifted her chin and said that calling the police had crossed a line that would be hard to uncross. Tom said that families do not get a free pass to harm one another. The words did not pile on. They stood like fence posts, marking a boundary too long ignored. Brianna's face shifted through disbelief, outrage, calculation, and something like fear. She tried again. She promised to call more, to be different, to be better. David listened because that is what he does. Then he told her the truth. He owed them both. Change is not a speech. Change is a set of actions repeated over time. He said the door to better would not open while this one stayed off its hinges. He asked her and Cody to leave. She did not move, not at first. Cody touched her elbow. The room did not press. It simply held steady. At last they walked toward the entry. At the threshold, Brianna turned back. Her eyes were bright with a hurt that felt genuine and with an anger that felt familiar. The guests did not speak. Robert stood beside his brother like a shore holds the edge of the sea. David kept his voice even and his posture kind. He did not look triumphant. He looked relieved and a little sad, like a man who has set down a heavy box and can finally straighten his back. Cody stepped onto the porch. Brianna lingered one heartbeat longer. Then she faced her father and spoke the sentence she had used all night like a key that might still open an old door. "This is not over, Dad." When the deadbolt clicked, the house finally sounded like peace. The night air outside cooled the entry for a breath, then settled back where it belonged. David stood with his palms still on the lock and felt the quiet move through the villa like a gentle tide. He did not feel triumphant. He felt steady. He felt like a man whose posture could finally be upright. He turned and found the people who had witnessed everything waiting with a kind of careful warmth. Patricia's eyes were kind. Tom and Linda stood together with their hands lightly touching, the way long partnerships do. Mark and Sarah waited near the hearth. Robert was closest, his expression a mix of pride and relief that did not require a single word. No one rushed in. That was the first kindness. The second was simple and unforgettable. Sarah lifted her glass and spoke in a voice that carried welcome. "To dignity," she said. "To a quiet that has been a long time coming." The others followed, not loudly, but with conviction that filled the room more surely than firelight. To a home that holds respect. To friendship that asks nothing. To David, who chose peace. He thanked them without speeches. He moved among them and felt a new ease in his own skin. When someone squeezed his shoulder, he allowed the touch to land without flinching. When someone offered to help gather plates, he smiled and said that the plates could wait. The point of the night had never been the dishes. It had always been the people. Conversation returned in a softer key. The stories picked up where they had paused, like a record that had been lifted carefully and now set back in place. Patricia told a small, funny memory from a long-ago conference where nothing important happened except that everyone learned to laugh again. Tom remembered the first time he and David had taken a risk together and how ordinary that day had looked while everything changed. Robert told a short story about their mother's way of setting a table, how she would smooth the linen with the side of her hand and say that care is a kind of prayer. Later, when the evening had lost its sharp edges, phones buzzed with small messages that felt like blessings. "Thank you for tonight. You reminded us what boundaries look like when they are graceful. Your home feels like a place where people can breathe. Sleep well. We love you, our friend." The words were not grand, but they were honest. They landed in David's chest and stayed. Just after 2:30 in the morning, the goodbyes began. Coats came off hooks, scarves wrapped, hugs were held a beat longer than usual. Each guest left a piece of warmth behind, the way a candle leaves scent long after it is snuffed. At the door, Mark pressed David's hand and said that a man only gets so many nights when a truth is set right. Tonight was one of them. Patricia promised to text in the morning. Tom said the house had a heartbeat and that he could hear it from the driveway. Robert lingered last. He did not repeat advice. He simply pulled his brother into an embrace and said the single word that mattered most. Proud. The street grew quiet. The villas up and down the block wore their holiday lights like calm smiles. Inside, David walked slowly through his rooms. The chairs looked relaxed, as if they had done good work. The table carried the faint perfume of rosemary and red wine. The fire had fallen to a low bed of coals that held their own small constellations. He turned off the music, and the silence that followed felt friendly. In the kitchen, he rinsed a few glasses and left the rest for morning. He wiped the counter as if blessing the day that had brought him to this point. He looked up and saw his reflection in the dark window. He did not look younger. He looked unburdened. The difference felt like a kind of miracle that had taken 30 years to arrive. Sleep came quickly in a house that had stopped bracing. He woke before dawn without an alarm and padded downstairs in bare feet. The east windows were still blue, but a thin line of gold had begun to draw itself along the horizon. He brewed coffee and stood in the quiet as the scent filled the room. Outside, the live oaks were still. The street was empty. Christmas morning waited without demands. He thought of the sentence he had spoken at the door. He would spend the time he had left as a person, not as a bank account with a heartbeat. The words were not a punishment. They were a promise. He could love his daughter without surrendering his dignity. He could keep a place in his heart without giving away the key to his peace. He stepped onto the terrace, cup warming his hands, breath visible in the cool air. The first light washed the stucco in soft gold. A hawk lifted from a fence post and floated toward the creek. He felt neither lonely nor defiant. He felt accompanied by the better part of himself, and by the memory of a room full of friends who saw him clearly. He imagined the day ahead and found that simplicity looked beautiful. He would read a few pages of a book that had waited too long. He would warm yesterday's rolls and a slice of prime rib and eat them at the table he had set for freedom. He would call Robert in the afternoon and then take an easy walk along the neighborhood trail where the winter grass shows its endurance. He might look at flights for spring. Ireland in March sounded like rain on old stone. A river cruise in June sounded like open windows and music at dinner. He could make these plans without seeking approval. That freedom felt new and correct. His phone buzzed. 3 messages arrived like small wreaths on his screen. Thank you for showing us how to keep love and keep boundaries. Your home is a sanctuary. We are your people. He answered each with gratitude and kept the phrasing simple. The best things do not need many words. As the sun rose fully, the villa brightened, room by room. The day felt generous. The man who lived inside it felt new. He stood there and understood that this had never been about a party or a house. It had been about choosing a life shaped by respect. He had drawn a line without cruelty. He had spoken with clarity without heat. He had offered a path to better and refused the path to worse. He lifted the cup to his lips and tasted coffee that had never seemed so good. The sky widened. Somewhere down the block, a porch light clicked off. Somewhere inside himself, a long-held breath finally finished its journey. At the first light of Christmas morning, David decided to spend the day in calm solitude, not loneliness. He smiled. The decision fit like a well-tailored coat. He carried it back inside and closed the terrace door with a quiet click that sounded, once again, like peace. If you are happy with this chapter, I can move to the closing piece in Prompt 4, a 500-word ending and life lesson for a gentle American audience over 60, in the same warm voice. Would you like me to write that now? The house was still, but it was the kind of stillness that carried warmth rather than emptiness. Morning light reached across the polished floorboards, touching the arm of a chair, glinting off a framed photograph that had survived every move and every season. In that quiet, one could almost hear the steady rhythm of a man's breathing, a rhythm no longer hurried by conflict or shadowed by doubt. It was the quiet after a door has closed for the last time on a chapter that needed to end. The journey to this peace had not been quick, nor had it been without pain. For years, value had been hidden beneath assumptions, worth measured through the narrow lens of others' expectations. There had been moments when silence was mistaken for weakness, when kindness was read as surrender. But the truth had its own timetable, and when it arrived, it came without fanfare. Just steady words, clear boundaries, and the unshakable decision to stand in dignity. It was not about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming a life. In the end, the lesson was as old as it was enduring. Never judge a person by the surface you see, for the heart may carry a quiet strength greater than appearances allow. Holding on to dignity is not an act of pride, but of preservation, a way of honoring the life you have built and the values you will not trade. Standing for truth, especially when it is uncomfortable, is not only a defense of oneself, but also a gift to others who may need to see that it can be done. Like a lighthouse on a fog-laden shore, a calm but unwavering light can guide ships that do not even know they are lost. And so, from the view of a life lived long enough to understand what matters, this was more than a victory over misunderstanding or misplaced judgment. It was a choice to shape the years ahead with peace, to create a space where respect lives at the center, and to believe that even from hurt, something good can grow. The hurt does not vanish, it settles into the soil, and if tended with care, it becomes the nourishment for stronger roots. Perhaps the story lingers because it belongs to more than one man. Many will know the quiet ache of being underestimated, the slow burn of being seen as less than they are. Many will understand the relief of drawing a line that should have been there all along. This is why the ending is not really an ending. It is an open gate to whatever comes next, walked through by someone who knows his worth. Take a moment to think about the people in your own story and the times you have had to stand quietly but firmly in who you are. If this story has warmed your heart, consider passing that warmth along. Somewhere, someone you know may be waiting for the gentle proof that respect can be reclaimed, and that even the smallest steady light can outlast the longest night.